With God, there is always more. More love, more life, more freedom. Welcome to Zoe's Exploring More with Michael Thompson. C.S. Lewis once wrote, "Our Heavenly Father has provided many delightful inns for us along our journey, but He takes great care to see that we do not mistake any of them for home." Join me and the team as we explore the kingdom together, discovering the deep truths and offering encouragement for the journey. There is always more. Welcome, friends and allies, to the Exploring More podcast. I'm Michael Thompson. I'm with my friends S.J. Jennings and Gary Barkalow. We're excited to be talking to you in the new year. Welcome to the new year, and hopefully your January has gone well. And as we continue to step into 2019, we wanted to start a series talking about the masculine journey. And we're on it as men. And yet I find that, except for probably the last 8 or 9 years when I began to look back on my masculine journey, I didn't understand the relevance of the things that have happened to me along my heart's journey and how they've shaped me, shaped my beliefs and my attitudes and perspectives about life. And if we underestimate our lives and the story that our life is, we will likely underestimate ourselves and who we are in that story. That was true for me. And so I'd love to just open up this with Gary and SJ a little bit about the masculine journey. What's your initial response about the importance, the significance of the masculine journey, why we would want to talk about it, why it's important?
I think, Michael, as you talk about that, and as I've explored the masculine journey in my own a little bit in part of our redemptive community, it occurs to me that without this kind of context, men know that they're on a journey, but they don't really understand the stages in the context of Christianity and, how Jesus would lead them through that. They think of it as, okay, I'm a child. Now I'm in college.
Yeah, adolescence.
Now I'm getting married.
Yeah.
Now I got to buy a house and have 2.5 kids and then retire and play golf and die. That's their journey.
Yeah, I think what you just described is how we often evaluate it is on the ground at those particular mile markers of responsibility, rather than something a little more epic and a little more large, a little more significant.
Even as I describe kind of what was on my heart to talk about the masculine journey, describe it that way, man, that's sad.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that just lands on me like, that is so small.
Yeah, I've lived there. I get it.
Me too, man.
I get it. And I want to encourage our listeners, they don't have to,
right,
as we step into this
series. Yeah, don't take that as diminishment.
Right, but when I look at my masculine journey now, it's still even a gravitational pull towards yesterday, right now, and tomorrow, and whatever the to-do list looks like.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe a couple weeks out, I got to get the Christmas lights out. We got to get the tree. Maybe a couple weeks out, I got to make some plans for somebody's birthday, or, trying to get away for the vacation a couple weeks out, But other than that, I don't usually look at my life kind of in that aerial view where there's a pretty large expanse of time and situations and opportunities and failures and accomplishments, something larger in that.
More epic. There's a tendency to drift into a place where we forget how epic our stories are.
Yeah. We just finished Christmas, right, Gary? It's a Wonderful Life. I mean, look at George Bailey, underestimating the significance of his life. How many of us do that? Why is that so popular? Why is that such a significant Christmas story that people will watch year after year around Christmas? There's something epic about that. There's something taking us into, your life is larger than you imagine, than you've come to know or understand.
Right. And to understand that there are phases in our life. There are certain things that are appropriate for a certain phase and other things appropriate for the next phase. We don't stay a boy our whole life. And the question is, what am I supposed to be like in the season to come? And without any definition, understanding biblically of phases, stages in our life, we just don't know what life is supposed to be like now, whether that's permission to be what we are at this moment versus something 10 years from now, or being something inappropriate now, something we should have grown out of, a failure to launch type of thing.
Right.
It's just helpful to know what is to be true in this season now, and then what's to be true in the next season.
Yeah. Continuing with that thought, is it going well? Am I on track? No, this is not going badly. This is how you learn. I mean, is there grace in it? Is there opportunity in it? Is there anybody in there guiding you, fathering you? in the masculine journey. This is not something you have to sort out by yourself. I mean, there's a lot to talk about. And this is not outside, as you said, the Christian vantage point that we're trying to bring to this masculine journey. This is not any different than developmental psychology. I mean, the stages of human beings and how they move through life. I mean, we see this. It's a very popular class. Even those who don't major in psychology are very interested in it. They'll take it as an elective if they can. It's just a fascinating idea. But what if we move past the fascination and into the reality of what you're proposing, Gary, of what does this really look like? What would it be to be in an appropriate place? We have a couple conferences, retreats that we do every year, 400 men. And when we let them go for free time, these are 40, 50, some 30-year-olds, some 60-year-olds, but when we let them go for free time around this big Young Life camp with all kinds of playground things, it's like boys running to the archery, running to the shotguns, running to the ropes course. Let's go play. It reminds me of recess when we were kids.
Oh, yeah. They run out of there.
So even though they're at a different stage, there's boyhood in there.
Right.
There's a young place that comes alive for me. And I know your dads have passed away, but when I'm with my dad, there's something still, even though I'm 54, there's something in me that can feel wonderfully like a boy. If that was wonderful. There's others of us who can feel shamed like a boy or afraid like a boy.
That's what occurred to me too. I think there's times that you have to go back and revisit previous stages so that they can be redeemed, right? This is part of the journey of the heart. It's not just linear. You're marching forward in our journey of redemption and more love, more life, more freedom. You've got to go back sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, you're talking about a timeline, and that's appropriate for the development of my heart and of my masculine heart on a journey. I was born in 1964, and you move through the 60s and 70s and early 80s, great decade, by the way, for music, going on to the 90s. And you described earlier, too, then you get married at a certain age, a lot of us in our 20s. How does that now affect? I can't get all my belongings in the trunk anymore. Yeah. I'm growing up. And I'm responsible for more. And so these stages become really interesting. Like you said, it's not just linear. Are there parts of us that's going to be ready when we hit that stage or should be ready when we hit that stage of young man in his 20s and 30s?
Yeah. Or are there things from my boyhood that are unresolved and have created wounds, vows, and agreements that I got to go back and revisit before I can move into the next stage?
You want me to answer the question? You said, are there? Yeah. Yes, there are.
Yes, there are.
Right. Gary, you've done a lot of work with this whole idea of the masculine journey, the journey of the heart. How do you see that working together, these, like SJ's bringing up, the previous stages, the earlier years, formative years? How do you see that playing into masculinity in a man who's older, trying to live this out as a man with responsibilities, husband, maybe a father? How do you see those earlier years shaping what a man's either enjoying or maybe even suffering from?
Right. Again, if we don't understand our story, we can't understand our present, right? What's driving us, whether it's out of fear or it's out of ambition, or maybe as Scripture talks about selfish ambition. It's very hard to understand it and even discern what it is exactly. So understanding what we were to receive, what we were to gain, what was to be honed, added to our life in these different phases and how they were to be added is just really important, to understand what was missing. And the great thing in God's economy, there's nothing it's too late now. Just isn't in God's economy with the kingdom. Good. It's too late now. And so when we understand what we need to go back and get, what God is offering, I just think that's extremely important.
You make me think of the word recover.
Yeah.
And I know recovery is a term that is in some ways associated with addiction and a community that really embraces that word. I think we're proposing that's a bigger word that could be and should be embraced by far many, many more of us. Recovering from some of the things that have happened to us, recovering either from what happened or, SJ, like you said, maybe recovering from what didn't happen. If we're stunted in some way, didn't have somebody to show us the way. There's a lot of different places to land when we think about wholeheartedness and what it looks like to walk with Jesus, to recover and to become who we really and truly are. When there's been a world and probably some agents from darkness that have done double time to convince us otherwise, that you're something else That's a rude awakening, and that's a very, very wonderful awakening, kind of all at the same time, when you realize you don't have to sing that song anymore. You don't have to play that music. You don't have to live that way.
I think three powerful words, or really I should say three powerful needs that everybody has in their life at any stage, is that they need permission, they need passion, and they need purpose. And they really do link together. So when we understand masculine stages of development, you could look at a certain stage and say, so what is the permission that needs to be given or felt or received by a parent or someone in authority or something? Permission to be who you're supposed to be at that stage in your life. And with that permission is also the permission to feel the passion that's in your heart. Adventure, building something, taking a risk, whatever that is, that's appropriate for that development. And then there's purpose. So what is my purpose right now? And while I think that purpose for a man's life, his unique purpose is the same throughout his life, it looks different at different phases, right? It's discovered differently. It's experienced differently. It's offered differently. So I think understanding stages helps us know what to do with this idea of permission, passion, and purpose.
Yeah, I'm going to come right back to that in a second, because we're talking about your story, our story, the storyline, the pieces, the parts, the ingredients that are in us as men and women too, in the developmental idea. And then there's this larger story our story's in, and I want to talk about that just for 4 or 5 minutes. When I say that, I think you men know what I mean, the larger story that your story's in. We're talking about the context. What would you say to that? How would you finish that opening phrase for our listeners? Why is that important to understand the story that your story's in?
I would respond to that just by saying, if you don't understand the context that your story's in, if you don't know the larger story that's going on around you, you're going to misinterpret so much of what's going on. And when you misinterpret things, I do anyway, and I've seen this in other men as well, you tend to fall back to default to, well, it must be me. There must be something wrong with, I made a mistake, I messed something up, I missed something, I misunderstood, whatever it might be. That misinterpretation opportunity, I think the enemy has been feeding off of that and capitalizing on that for, eons.
To be ignorant or naive of the larger story your story's in, you're saying, is a real recipe for blame, even self-loathing,
shame, diminishment,
lack of confidence.
I should have known better.
Right. That's good. Gary, what is that, the larger story your story's in? Where does that take your heart, your thoughts?
I think all of us, again, men and women, we strive for understanding meaning, purpose to interpret, because we're people of meaning and purpose.
Yeah, we're made that way.
We're made that way. And so we will always strive to understand why and what and how. And again, without a context, like you were saying, SJ, without a context, just with the event by itself, and our life is filled with events, and our striving to understand it, we will misinterpret if we don't understand the context, the surroundings, that incident, that circumstance fell in. Just like reading any story, if you come into the middle of a story, there's a good chance you're not going to understand the character or why something's happening until you understand the whole story. And then it all makes sense. I mean, we look at Joseph's life, and you take any one particular thing and none of it makes sense. You really have to doubt God's logic in this or his sovereign control. But then you come to the end, and he says, what you meant for evil, God meant for good, which is now being done, the saving of many lives. And you say, I understand. I understand how God got him here and had him prepared for this particular transcendent moment. David's life the same. So context, the larger story is incredibly important. And as you're saying, knowing that our story is not the larger story.
Right.
It is a chapter within. It is a theme within.
Yeah, and I'm a character within. That's really good. We want our friends and allies to know that because your life's in a larger story doesn't mean it's small. As a matter of fact, it's just the opposite. When you find that your life and your journey is in a much larger story, it actually invites you to be larger. It invites you to take your part and play your role in an incredible way. And it was a friend of Gary's, Brent Curtis, that in The Sacred Romance, that coined that phrase that I understood at first, that your life, the context of your story, is you live in a love story in the midst of a fierce battle. That headline alone, if you can get your arms around that, kind of like hugging a mountain, I mean, it's really a big idea. But if you live in the greatest love story set in the midst of the fiercest battle, you're going to start to find the context of there is an evil that does not sleep. There is a kingdom of darkness that's at work. There is a prince of this dark world, Jesus called him. And that's why it is hard to navigate if you don't live within the context of a larger story. You won't understand what's happening to you, why it's happening, and that there is evil in the world. There is sin. People sin all the time against one another. It's seldom just an isolated issue where you are self-wounding. I mean, somebody had to teach you how to do that. Somebody did that to you. So we're talking about a very large idea when we kind of move to the larger story for a moment. But I don't want to get stuck there. Anything else on that? The weight, the significance of the larger story before we move on?
You can't underemphasize the point that you made that just because you're in a larger story doesn't mean that you're smaller. That was for somebody. I don't know that I've heard you say that way before, exactly that way. So listeners, maybe it's you. But it's important to recognize that what we're talking about is Jesus is inviting us into move away from this naivety that we talk about to this larger story and into something much more epic than the day-to-day drudgery of just going through life and then you die. This is an epic journey. It's an epic story, and you have a role and a part and a glory to bring to that story.
Yeah. I would just put a seal around that whole thing you just said, SJ, because you're needed.
No doubt. Every one of you.
And so to live small or to live confused or to live disoriented or to live less, I mean, all of that, we all want to live up to our potential. But if you don't have the context of what that even involves and the God who created you for intimacy and oneness, connectedness, all those things that you just mentioned too, Gary, about made to matter. It's because we do matter. And there's a kingdom at work wanting to thwart that whole concept, that whole idea, that very thing that you could believe.
Yeah.
And that if you would believe it, it would have the kind of power, weight, and authority in your life that it's supposed to. It's putting the right voltage in. It's putting the right batteries in. It's putting the right perspective in to a human being that often we realize this a little bit later for most of us. Even if you stepped into the kingdom, became a Christian when you were 8 or 4 or 14, there's something about the mileage needed in the developmental journey, right? In the masculine journey, there's something about coming to realize how true something was. It's in your 20s or 30s.
Back to It's a Wonderful Life. George Bailey has gray on the side of his hair, on his sideburns there when he is at the point where he needs this message that you're needed.
Yeah.
He wasn't there to save his brother, so all those guys in that troop ship died. I mean, the impact that he had, and he needed a little bit of mileage, and some things to not go exactly.
In order to look back. Yeah, there was enough to look back at.
Things didn't go according to his plan.
Yeah.
Right. But if he had gone off to college and traveled like he wanted to, he wouldn't have been there for some of those things.
Yeah. I'm 54. I was 38 when my system, Jesus said, all right, let's unravel this system and unravel the man out of there.
Yeah. Funny. I think I was 37, maybe 38. It's right around there.
How about you? When was your?
Probably mid to late 40s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we'll be back in just a few minutes with more on this masculine journey conversation. And then we're going to dial into some particular aspects of it. We'll be right back with more of the Exploring More podcast in just a minute.
Hey, Exploring More podcast listeners, I just wanted to bring your attention to our annual conference called the Heart of a Warrior Encounter. It's our weekend conference initiative designed to take a man into his deep heart and intimate encounters with God. Time away with God is critical to healing, training, becoming more. And our main themes align with material found in John Eldredge's books, Robert Lewis's Men's Fraternity, Neil Anderson's Victory Over the Darkness, and the teachings of C.S. Lewis, Dallas Willard, A.W. Tozer, and other great faculty members of our hearts. All created to take a man further up and further in to the life that God offers. During the weekend, we have 3 main objectives: help a man get his heart back, teach him how to fight, and show him where the battles are. To see Christ come for a man's heart and what God is up to in validating a man, initiating him, and calling him into the larger story is truly a glorious thing. It is a fierce journey for every man, but one that desperately needs to be taken. I want to encourage you to join the squadrons of men who are hungry and thirsty for more. The kingdom needs more men who know what it is to walk deeply with God. Come with us and be one of the men who is seeking and finding more. Visit www.zoe.org/events for more information about the Heart of a Warrior encounter. The dates are March 21st through March 24th, Thursday to Sunday, 2019, and we hope you'll join us. Hope we'll see you there.
Welcome back to the Exploring More podcast. I'm with my friends SJ and Gary, and we are talking about the masculine journey, the weightiness and the wildness of the journey of the heart for a man. And there's a parallel on this whole conversation for women, and we'll get the ladies together to explore that another day. But just to revisit, your life matters. You were made to live in the larger story, and it means that your life does have the meaning and significance. The question is, in many ways, who told you differently? How did you settle in or compromise to some other position? That's an idea that your heart can be arrested along the journey by people who have hurt you, people who have caused pain, people who from their own compromised or insecurities or own pain, pass that along. Wounded hearts wound hearts.
Mm-hmm.
And so to get through this story and through the masculine journey without taking a hit or being a casualty, I'm pretty much ready to go on record as that's impossible.
Mm-hmm.
Is that your experience?
Yeah, there is no environment where you can be so protected from the fallenness of this world and the brokenness of people that you won't experience that. And even if you could, the minute that protective layer is taken away, you're in a lot of trouble.
Yeah.
You will be devastated, overwhelmed by brokenness.
Well, and I'm reminded of the C.S. Lewis quote, too. I mean, you can be safe, right? But you're going to lock your heart away in a vault. And inside that vault, cold and dark.
It's a false security.
Right. It's a false sense of security. It dies from lack of love and interaction in there.
I think even in the most protected environment our kind ever was in, there was a serpent. We were never closer than in the garden when we were in an environment where we were so loved, so provided for, so protected, so fathered. And yet even there, our God didn't close the gate, keep it from being a place where we could be lured into other places, tempted away, confused. And so it's the right way to look at this story and understand the fallenness that we've been born into. I think it was Larry Crabb, I heard it first from the life outside the garden. And it does make it sound like life inside the garden's a utopia, but there's a reality that even there was this warfare.
Right.
There was Lucifer falls, Satan comes, and he goes after the image bearers of God. And Revelation tells us, as well as Jesus throughout the Gospels, he's not done. He still has a part to play in this larger story. And that's what can really, really bring kind of the damage that you were talking about, SJ, along the journey that needs recovery, that needs restoration, that needs the hand of God and the work of God to recover from the wounded chapters or wounded segments of a man's life, of his journey. So let's talk about, just for a minute, what we've come to learn or what we've shared. We share a lot of this in the Heart of a Warrior Advance weekend. We share some of it in the Heart of a Warrior Encounter weekend. But the masculine journey, you might look at it, how could we describe it as stages? What would be the stages that we offer men at the conferences? Let's offer that to our listeners.
Well, the first stage is just going to be this boyhood, as you say, Michael, the beloved stage. What's really fascinating is I'm realizing now, as a father of older children, and now they have children, being a grandfather, I'm watching my grandchildren and watching their innocence of hearts. They're wanting to trust, they're wanting to have joy and fun and truly be delighted in. I'm seeing it now with older eyes and realizing how important it is, how needed it is when I see it in them. And I told my adult children, I said, you really taught me what it means in the boyhood stage to be beloved. I just watched you just love life, love us, loved being loved unapologetically, having fun, adventuring, and feeling safe in it. I look back, that was foreign to me growing up, at least as I can remember it. What an important stage, because, the men that I know right now at whatever age, older age, who I would say, boy, there's a stability about their life, and they're genuine, they're authentic, they really do walk with God. There's very little posing going on, they're the real deal. As I hear their story, a lot of them came from a boyhood where they were deeply loved. Yes, there was brokenness, yes, there was hurt, there was sin, there was everything else. But nonetheless, there was an extraordinary love in their family. And I thought, boy, that is so key to the man they become today, though they still had to work through healing and forgiveness and release and everything else. But nonetheless, what a powerful thing.
Yeah. And as we go on in this podcast series, we're going to talk about each of these stages. But yeah, boyhood, that first decade, how your heart was handled, who was handling it. I think all of that so matters. And if you were provided for, protected, allowed to, in many ways, just be free, be loved. I don't mean do anything you wanted to do, eat what you wanted, sleep
but
when you
you
wanted.
you didn't live under tyranny or
That's right.
oppression.
Yeah. Belovedness, being loved in that stage and every stage really. But that is, you talked about earlier, SJ, the linear component of these segments or chapters or stages of a man's life. But if we went the other way and went vertical, this would be the foundational stage. How this was built, how this was constructed by typically other craftsmen, other hearts on their journey. How your heart was handled is very, very significant to the foundation that other stages are going to be built upon, which right there, just some of us go, yeah, I know that. Some
That's
listeners are going,
very
okay,
true.
that explains why I can't find that center. Like in my life, I'm leaning.
Yeah, or something just feels unstable.
Right, the instability
for
of that.
some reason.
Right, right. Yeah, boyhood and that foundation. And then kind of in the next decade, we kind of come around to this ranger stage. It's when a boy starts to be able to move outside of his room in the confines of even his own yard. Especially us boys who grew up in the 60s and 70s. I mean, it was being able to knock on other friends' doors. Can SJ come play? And so you're starting to explore. A young masculine heart in that stage is exploring, building things. It's really an important stage for
Testing boundaries.
Yes, how things work. And when you're a little guy, there's always that moment. I'm sure every little guy has it. Feel my muscle.
Yeah.
Look at how strike the pose. Look at how strong I am. Well, that gives way to testing that strength. Do I have a strength? All of a sudden, you're starting to compare yourself with other boys and their strength and their skills. You run races. Do you win or lose? You play games that there's winners and losers. That's not how boyhood really works. Grandpa loses to you in checkers when you're 6 and 4 and 5, but now you're starting to compete and it's a little different stage.
And you want the competition, right? That's where the little boy goes, Dad, are you purposely losing to me right now?
Yeah. You're found out, right?
Yeah, you're found out. You want to know, can you really win? Again, test who you are.
Yeah, I think of grades. All of a sudden, kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade, there's parent meetings. Yeah, SJ's doing well. Yeah, SJ's not doing so well. But when you start getting up in the 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade, it's grades.
Yeah, report cards and notes, written in there from the teacher.
It's not did you try to do the assignment, it's how well did you do it. So the world shifts a good bit, and that foundation gets rocked on a little bit in the ranger stage, in the exploring stage. And there's trips to the emergency room. You fall from a certain height, you're going to feel it. You're learning important things. Yeah. You get too close to the fire, you're getting the back teen.
The first cast,
you're learning how
that you have to put on, and after a broken arm or broken leg or both. Not that as a boy you're free from bonking and hurting and owies and all that, but sometimes that competition, has some higher injury components to it. And for most of us, we're really starting to see how the world works. It's getting bigger. Boyhood should be a world that just kind of revolves around you, but you should graduate. You shouldn't be a man in your 40s where the world's revolving around you. You're starting in your late teens, early teens. You're starting to observe how the world works and how you're supposed to work in it. And your world is getting bigger. When you're the little guy, you can go out and run around and play with Mikey, right? But you don't go outside where you can hear the bell I'm going to ring when you need to come home for dinner, right? But then you get the wheels.
Boundaries
you get
are
the
lifted.
Driver's license.
Yeah.
Your world gets bigger that way.
Responsibilities, opportunities, privileges, all change. Maybe you get your first job.
Right.
And, if that stage goes fairly well, you realize how money works. If you give a boy money all the time, if you just give him money when he wants it, what's the consequence?
He wants more and expects you to give it to him.
And what's the false idea about how the world works?
Right.
Working, hard work, allowances, paid for things, those are really, really vital to the development of working and finding a return for your work.
I can remember too, I think what we said about boyhood is so much of it is about, as it should be, being protected as a beloved, as such a young boy. But then in the ranger stage, I think what shifts is now I also want to be a protector. We start thinking that shouldn't happen to my best friend. I need to say something, do something, or to my sister. There's this, now I want to be a protector. And that's a good shift that should take place.
Yep. And it keeps shifting from that stage to the next stage, warrior stage.
Right.
You know, boyhood to ranger, ranger to warrior, where there's some real right and wrong that is experienced and understood, and convictions are developed, and then they play out. Like you said, I think that's a great beginning and maybe a great transitional idea that there is evil in the world. And there's an unfairness that is happening, but I don't want to be on the wrong end of it. I don't want to tolerate it. The warrior comes up. What causes will you fight for? What causes will you stand against? How will you enter into now protecting and offering strength for others? Now that gets to be really interesting for fighting for your position, fighting for your place, and it can really get wonky in that stage. Especially when the next stage, the lover stage, enters into really, really early and comes in at ranger stage. And at 12, it's all about the girl. And nobody's there to help you understand, no, there's time for that. We've got some other things to learn in this stage of development.
If only someone had come along and said that.
Oh, yeah. I would agree with anybody who said, it's a little worse for today's boys than it was. There's just that much more marketing. There's that much more visual. There's that many more channels and commercials and ways that it can get into
that much more
your heart, your
hurtful
psyche.
Permission given to that.
Yeah. So moving from the ranger to the warrior is a tough step. And yet warrior is starting to more and more guard his own heart. I mean, that would be the ideal path to go, guarding his own heart, defending what's good and right and true, and learning what's good and right and true. You know, having somebody older, maybe he's worked for somebody who's a really good boss, or his mom and dad are still together in that stage. There's a marriage. They can see what that looks like. They start to look at different models of masculinity, those who are on down the trail a bit, and even a father figure might step into a warrior's life and help and guide and speak. All of a sudden, the words become really important to the warrior. You have any experience with that?
I think an important thing, as you were saying, for a warrior is to see another good warrior. Because I'm really interested, as a younger man, what does a strong, good man look like? How does he talk about others? How does he fight for others? How does he fight for his own heart? And so I think to find another good warrior who speaks lovingly and powerfully of others and wants to fight for them rather than use his strength for his own good and use it for theirs.
That's good. I like that a lot.
And it's one thing hearing it, but it's another thing observing it and having a man walk alongside of you and say, let's learn how to fight together.
Yeah.
Is really powerful. There aren't a lot of men offering themselves as an example as a warrior to other men.
Right. We're talking about late teens, early 20s, and even through the 20s and maybe 30s. But I tell you, a great example is Robert the Bruce. I look at Robert the Bruce in the film Braveheart, and there he was trying to find what it is that he's to become. And he has this provoking from William Wallace, basically, a provoking of another warrior and what it looks like. And yet he looks at his life and he evaluates it, right, Gary? And he says, I'm not that, but that is very attractive to me. I want to be more like that rather than the noblemen that my dad or that I've experienced them firsthand. So I think that's a good example of what it looks like to see that, invited up into that, another warrior who can call you into and invite you into the battle and realize it's a battle for the heart, that these are really much larger roles than you're shrinking back to.
Right.
Your strength is, you said this earlier, your strength is not for you, it's for others. And there's only some hard ways a warrior gets to learn that. And it is hard ways. You did it wrongly. You did it compromisingly. I mean, there's some of these lessons that you're just not going to get right out of the gate. Even if you had it modeled for you, you're going to have to handle circumstances and situations where, remember where Robert Bruce says to his dad, I'll never be on the wrong side again. And that's a conviction.
He's in a position, Robert the Bruce, he wants to go the direction Wallace wants him to go. He just doesn't know how to break out of it. He doesn't know how to break out of his life that he's in. with his dad, who's toxic, even physically toxic. I mean, he's got this ailment, and Bruce just can't figure out how to break away until there's a sacrifice made.
And he chose wrongly. He made a very poor calculation and made a huge error. SJ, there's another better example that we need to bring forward in this stage because it's going to affect the rest of them, and that is the character and the person of Jesus. I mean, look at what he inspired. It's right what you were talking about, Gary. These men, these disciples, his friends, saw what it looked like to war for, in the most loving and fierce ways, those who are oppressed, those who are overlooked, those who are sick, those who are hurting. And it wasn't just for them that he came. He was coming for at that time, the religious as well. They just couldn't see him or hear him or really couldn't stand him in terms of the kind of king that he was and what he represented on earth. But I look at how he inspired so many, all the way to the Passover and what we know as Palm Sunday. I mean, what kind of man after 3 years would win an election that's not being had? They're just voting with their palm branches. Hosanna, Hosanna, Hosanna in the highest. He was the king that they had decided as a people. And then just in a few days, it all turns upside down. But those 11 out of 12 guys, 11 out of 12 men became game changers. They did what he taught them to do. They fulfilled these roles that we were talking about. They didn't know how it all was going down, how it all worked, but they became very fierce warriors, providers, protectors of the gospel, carrying it, as Jesus said, to the uttermost parts of the earth, entrusting it to others, as Paul says to Timothy, entrust it to reliable men like yourself. You know, it's a very, very large transition.
The thought that you're stirring here is there aren't really any stories that I'm remembering of a great warrior that wasn't with other warriors. It's never a warrior by himself. He's always with other warriors. Mm-hmm. And typically, great warriors always have a good king.
Which is our next stage.
Which is our next stage. But the idea is, in this stage of our life as the warrior stage, we really need to be around some other warriors, good warriors. But we also need a king or kings in our life as well, good kings.
Yeah, who can love us enough to tell us the truth in love, bring us close. So let's go all the way back to boyhood and belovedness. You can see now, by the time we get to not just linear stage in the timeline of king stage, but now we're building upon each one of these. Now we know why there's so few good kings and men who are needing to recover, needing restoration, needing these stages of their lives recalled and given some very loving attention by a good father.
Right. And how important every stage really is.
Yeah.
There's no stage that's really less important.
None.
Right.
And being a king, having authority, maybe the king stage is late 40s and through the 50s, but now you have a kingdom that you preside over. And we get this idea of a king when John says in Revelation, he's the King of Kings, capital K, king of other kings, small k. We're the small k kings. We have a kingdom in which we preside, that we have some authority. Maybe it's financial resources. Maybe it's a company, people that you're over. What has God entrusted to you to manage, to bring leadership over? And what kind of leader are you? What is it that those under you experience? How do you make them feel in your presence, in your company, in your home, in a circle that you're in charge? You've been delegated the responsibility and the opportunity and the privilege of leading, loving others. That's what we mean by a king.
We live in a time right now when what has probably always been true but is very obvious right now and talked about are people who have been in positions as kings of great authority and have abused others. And with their authority and the weightiness in their sphere, whether it's a religious sphere or it's a corporate sphere like an entertainment or whatever it is, have taken advantage of others and hurt them desperately. Right. And even the authority of their life caused them to be afraid to speak out. But now we're seeing it. People are speaking out. And so we're seeing what bad kings really look like and the devastation that they can cause. And so if that is true, then the good a good king can create and cause is also tremendous.
I'm brought back to what you said, Gary, about boyhood. that the most settled, oriented men that you know, it's not that they didn't have their challenges in their boyhood, but they had a safe, nurturing, loving place to grow.
Mm-hmm.
That little kingdom, they sat under a good king and a good queen.
Mm-hmm.
And they were beloved sons in the midst of that, right? They were loved, they were protected, they were cared for in that little kingdom. And as you were describing that, the kings that have misused their power and in many cases abused their power, it occurs to me that there's many listeners who would think of their parents that way in that kingdom where they first experienced a bad king.
Yeah. The effect of divorce on the souls, on the hearts of little ones, boyhood, girlhood, ranger, princess, these stages that they're going through, these are huge, huge effects when that is part of the storyline, that the kingdom that you were under is now broken. And I think the effects of that, maybe for some of our listeners, maybe for some guys around the table, when that's just a way that this really significantly can play out. I think when a king uses others, that started earlier. That's what we're saying about the masculine journey and the developmental side of this is he didn't just start using people in the king stage.
No, he learned that early on.
He learned that a long time ago, and nobody was there to help him make the appropriate transition. Because when you are a boy or a girl, little, belovedness looks like it is all about you. I see you. I'm entering your world because the world's kind of all around you, and mom and dad and grandma and grandpa clap and they cheer and they hug and they read and they hold and they serve and they help. That's all a part of belovedness, being loved. But then there's this really important transition early that, okay, sweetheart, it's not about you. I want you to help me take care of your brother or take care of your sister.
You've got some responsibilities
or I want
now.
you to put away your clothes. I want you to take a bath. It's just a beautiful progression. But if you get stuck in everybody serving you all around you, that's where bad kings and queens are really formed, or through the wounding process. I'll never trust anybody. Again, I will take care of myself. I mean, some of these wounding moments have very significant ramifications for later. And that's what we're talking about. That's why we're talking about this.
Yeah, I know you don't promote using animated films to make some of these points, but Cusco and the Emperor's New Groove, that's a great example of that right there that you're describing.
Well, Disney has tons of these reckoning, stories of reckoning. You know, look at Simba and the Lion King. I mean, we can just go on and on.
On and on,
You got me wound up now. I mean, Kuna Matata, really? That's great boyhood stuff and just out there playing all the time.
Hiding.
But Pride Rock is in trouble. We need our king back. And so there's a reckoning. And he has to overcome the lies that Scar fed him as a boy. These stories are all around us and very important. They move our hearts when we watch them, but sometimes we stay too disconnected to them when it comes to the significance of these stories and what they're offering us in our journey. Joseph, David, Moses, Jesus, for goodness sake. He's born into a world at war. Joseph has to take him and flee to Egypt because the mafia has put a hit on him. Yeah, what kind of story are we in? What kind of story have we been born into? What kind of characters are in this story in the spiritual realm? The equivalent of fallen angels, and yet the kingdom, angels of light, the hosts of God's army. This is a military story.
Epic.
In many, many ways.
Sure.
So the last stage after the king stage is the sage stage. And I want to just talk about it for a minute. And then in our next episode, we're going to explore in depth this sage stage, as well as the other stages. We're going to kind of work backwards through the masculine journey. But Gary, if you were to describe the sage stage, we're coming to twilight years. We're coming to lives well into their 60s maybe, 60s
Probably,
and 70s, more that age, 60s and 70s. How would you describe that stage? What's that to look like?
I mean, I think at this stage in life, as a man has walked with God, there is much he, as well as she, have learned. And it's time to now put your focus and your investment in others with what you have learned and leaving it and imparting it to others. There should be a freedom now. There's a freedom from, I have to fit into this world, I have to fit into your world, you have to ask me, to the point of now I just want to generously give. I think the sage stage, these later years, should be a life of extravagant giving, of your wisdom, your time, your love, your presence. because it is greatly needed. And I know it's greatly needed because it's so assaulted in a person's life that they are not needed anymore. So it really should be a time of offering. And let me use the word offering instead of imparting, because we have been imparted wisdom by others and we really didn't enjoy the experience. It was more of teaching, scolding, rebuking. But I want to just say offering wisdom, because it's that wisdom. At this point, we understand that what it is to give truth in love at this point, and to be able to say, I understand what life has felt like for you. I have been there. I remember Larry Crabb years ago said, an older man should be able to walk in front of his children a few steps in front to show them the way, but close enough to be able to turn around and say, follow me, I love you, I understand. But nonetheless, you need to follow now. You need to do something. I think that's what the sage years should look like.
Yeah, we're going to talk a lot more about that in a few minutes, but I love what you said. A sage is one who's walked with God for a while. You know, I go back to these stages of the masculine journey, and that's kind of the wonder. I wonder when God entered the story of that story. Yes, God is authoring the larger story, but when did God begin to author your story? When did he get the pen? When did you give him that privilege, that right, that opportunity, that responsibility? And good kings, they've walked with God for a while. Good warriors have found their king in whom they can love and serve and be his friend. The adventure in the ranger stage, we really realize that the adventure is with God. The lover stage, which we didn't talk a ton about, but it's so encompassing of so many other stages. It's like the lover stage comes in early, most often too early.
Too early.
But it progresses through 4 very significant stages: ranger, warrior, king, and sage. I mean, to love a woman well, to care for her heart, and to learn how to do that, walk with God. And even that opportunity and responsibility alone is just magnificent. And yet very, very, very few men could that be said about. He loved his wife magnificently. So as we look at the sage stage, as we look at all the stages, we want to encourage our listeners. There's a lot more to unpack. We want to unpack each one of those stages a little bit more. And invite you to hang with us and stay with us as we do, that the development of your heart really matters to God. And the recovery of wounded, broken, hurting places is critical to becoming wholehearted. And I think that's something, if you guys would just comment, that hope that you could recover a part of your heart. How would you describe that? How would you invite a listener to give to hope again, things that didn't go well? Maybe they didn't get what they should have, or what they did get they shouldn't have in these stages. How would you describe in a few sentences, a few ideas of what you found God to be up to in restoring you, bringing you to wholeheartedness?
Yeah, I'm going to comment about that first because I don't want to follow Gary. But but really, I think for me and hopefully for the listeners, understanding that Jesus is in the restoration business. He's in the business of restoring things back to the way that he intended them to be, to resurrect. That's what he wants to do. And so many of us, and I did this too, we stop at the cross. We stop at the message of salvation and just live there.
Yeah.
Like, okay, I got my ticket out of hell, I'm good. So to continue this journey all the way through, well into the sage stage of your life of reclamation and resurrection, that's what Jesus wants for us. And it's a glorious thing.
That's good. Yeah, going forward often can look like going back.
No doubt.
And recovering things that were hurt, broken.
Resurrect
wounded.
your boyhood.
Yeah.
Resurrect your, ranger stage.
Especially if you didn't have one.
Right.
What would it look like
If
for
it
the
was
father,
co-opted
to father you well, to take him up on that idea of fathering you? Yeah, that's really good, SJ. Yeah, I like that a lot.
I often think about the fact that Jesus is still a redeemer. I think about that when I became a Christian back in 1973 and all that, but he is still a redeemer in my life. He's still a restorer. He's still a savior, and he's still looking for me to come to him for that. And he does that. I mean, that's the good news. Yeah. What can be so discouraging is if I think, as I'm hearing this, oh gosh, I really never had this stage. Yeah. I am deficit in that, and that will never be made up. But we have a God who's not bound by time. And
Yeah.
he can go back to those things and say, we'll go back, we'll get it, we'll heal it. I'll be that for you.
Yeah.
I can restore your soul, every part of it. And he just simply does it. This is a God who's not bound by certain methods or tools. He can use absolutely anything. And he does.
And he does. Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
And what's really key, I think, Gary, to what you're saying is if you can identify some of those things that are missing or in need of recovery or restoration, and then your will can engage in that. On the simplest notes, I could tell you stories of men who just never were taught how to turn a screwdriver or fix anything, and they're well in their 40s, 50s, and you can always parcel that out to the repair guy. But there's part of the masculine journey about how things work and how to fix things, how to do some basic home repair. I mean, I'm not telling you to be an electrician or a plumber, but just to be able to learn how to do things can bring a man alive. Just to assist my dad growing up on some of the projects that we did around the house really served me in being able to do some of the projects around the house. Now, I got to call SJ from time to time because he did a little more of that than I did. But,
You're good, man.
But
You're doing a good job.
That's an incredible, and look at Google and YouTube. I mean, you can look so much of this stuff up to recover certain parts of your masculinity. Maybe it wasn't bestowed to you. Maybe it wasn't given to you. So when you said how many different ways that God can do that, if you weren't allowed to adventure, you may not want to go do Everest. Don't take that on, but maybe you start hiking. Maybe you weren't a Boy Scout. You didn't learn how to read a map or a compass or I mean, there's a lot of ways, very interesting ways to be fathered by good men and see the Father repairing parts of your ache, parts of your heart and soul that maybe you're aching for that. So we got a lot more of this to talk about in the weeks ahead. And so
listeners, if you've got questions or comments you want to share with us, please email us at exploringmore@zoe.org.
Yeah, we'd love to hear from you. We look forward to unpacking a lot more of this. This has been a huge part of our walk with God and watching him do some things for us that we couldn't do ourselves and to trust him with that. So invite your comments there. And yeah, go to our website. You can go to zoe.org. There's a lot of different resources there, some free ones. Even the larger story, The Two Realms, Two Kingdoms, is an audio that you can get your hands on. Thanks for listening. Thanks for sharing your time with us. And we always appreciate when you share some of our podcast information with friends and allies of yours. So until next time, we'll see you again, I hope, on the Exploring More podcast. We hope you have enjoyed this episode of Exploring More. The landing page for this podcast is zoe.org/podcast. That's ZOWEH.org/podcast. where you can find the show notes and various platforms to which we broadcast. You can also find us and the Life of More by visiting Zoe on YouVersion Bible app, Right Now Media, our Facebook page, and Zoe on Instagram and Twitter. Remember, with God there is always more, and you were made for more.